Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of Hocus Focus. I'm Thomas Sheridan.
And I'm Sara Mondaini.
And tonight we have a selection of topics that I think you will find very interesting. We will cover some stuff that's, classic Forteana, but we look at it from a new angle. And plus, we'll hopefully introduce you to new topics and new areas of study. I hope you're keeping well, Sara, and you're looking very nice and ready for this week's show.
Oh, yes, I am. I'm looking forward to it. And you're looking very dapper yourself, Cardinal Sheridan.
Well, we have standards to maintain, and we shall maintain them.
Okay, then.
So the first topic tonight is an unusual one, and I think you'll like this one, and it's the year 1816. Now, why the year 1816? Well, something happened that year that was quite remarkable. A volcano happened in Asia, in the East, I think in Indonesia, that covered the earth in particles and particulates in the upper atmosphere. And literally 1816, there was no summer. And it led to worldwide famines and all kinds of other disruptions. In France, in the middle of July, they recorded a deep frost. And that's how bad it was. There was literally no summer. But something remarkable came out of it, the Gothic movement and also the Romanticism movement, because it just so happened during that summer, Lord Byron, Polidori, Shelley, and amazingly also Mary Godwin, who was soon to become Mary Shelley and the author of Frankenstein, or under its original title, The Modern Prometheus, basically out of a series of hallucinogenics, drugs, late night talks, competitions to write stories and poems. They essentially, these four people with a few others that dropped in now and again, on the shores of Lake Geneva, not far from where Sheridan is today, ironically enough, created the Gothic movement. As a result of that, climatic issues as well, the Romantic movement came about as well, mainly through the painters. The reason why William Turner's paintings have all these incredible red sunsets and yellow skies, and people think, well, that can't be real. Well, it was real then for a few years around 1816. So this segment is about how a climatic event, disaster, caused a tremendous cultural shift that's with us to the present. And possibly not only Frankenstein, but also the Dracula vampire novel as well came out of this also. The Gothic movement and the Romanticism movement. Did you ever hear about this before, Sara?
The year without a summer?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, I've heard about that before. Yeah. It's when I was learning about J.M.W. Turner, it was brought up about him, and that's what inspired his sunsets in his paintings. It was the sulfur, or the tephra, I think it was called. It was released into the atmosphere from the volcano. So, yeah.
Also, early on in the year, Byron recorded a poem that came in a vision, and it was identical to what was to happen in the year without a summer. Like the moon would not be seen, the stars would not be seen, and crops would not grow. And so he had this kind of visionary poetry that came upon him. But I think that there was a film made back in the 80s by Ken Russell. I've never seen it, actually, called Gothic, and it starred Gabriel Byrne and Natasha Richardson and a few others. And so I heard people telling me it's a bit sensationalist, but it's amazing to think that in one room, in one house, these people were trapped, and through a mini Renaissance kind of happened that actually changed the world. The concept of going into it's very Jungian what happened. They went into their dreams and their shadow world, and from it came out this notion of Frankenstein. It's probably the most famous thing that came out of it from Mary Shelley's novel. Now, this happened because she had a vision when she woke up one night and had a vision of Dr. Frankenstein actually bringing life to the monster. And this was a time in history when you had things like galvanism. And galvanism was a belief that, well, it was discovered that if you put, the name of the scientist, I believe, was Galvin, and you put electric probes onto a frog's legs, they would start, a dead frog's legs, just as amputated legs, they would start kicking. So they discovered that the central nervous system in mammals was controlled, and amphibians and fish was controlled by electrical impulse. And therefore, this belief came about that by using electrical charges, you could reanimate the dead and bring them to life. Now, they used to do experiments where they put electric shocks on the dead people and they'd move. And, but they weren't giving them a spark of life. And Mary Shelley was kind of warning us, when you think about it, transhumanism, wasn't she? A little bit back all that time then.
Yeah, and it was around the time of the grave snatchers as well, the body snatchers, when there was lots of snatching going on in the graves, Burke and Hare. And I was reading, apparently there was a shortage of bodies because they moved on from frogs and went on to experimenting with galvanism on the hanged criminals, but only those that were hung for murder.
Yes, and it was considered like this abomination by the Presbyterian churches in particular, that this was like the most diabolical work possible. And this would have, all this hysteria would have fed into Mary Shelley's novel. That novel came out of a competition they had to see who could write the best shorts, the best ghost story. They used to sit around at night in the Via in Lake Geneva, on Lake Geneva, and read German ghost stories that were translated to English for them. And then this competition of who could write the best ghost story. And there was Polidori, I believe, was it, that wrote The Vampire, and it was actually the forerunner of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So you had the two classics, like, of the horror genre, Frankenstein and Dracula, fermented within this year without a summer.
I know that Mary Shelley and her husband had some quite tragic stuff happen in their lives, and they both believed that the dead could be successfully reanimated. And there was a child, William Shelley, and he was ill and he died. And by the skill of a doctor, the Shelley's doctor, he was actually once reanimated after the process of death had actually commenced. And he lived 4 days after the time of his death. So they actually believed that death could be reversed. So she experienced it for herself on members of her own family, which I thought was very, very creepy.
Well, there were certain diseases that caused people to come back to seem like they're dead. And that was, I think cholera is actually one of them. And that was very common back then. Cholera can actually make a person look like they're dead, unless you have an EKG, like an MRI meter, an EKG meter or something. The brain activity remains, but it feels like they're dead. And during the famine here in Ireland, that's where Bram Stoker got the idea for Dracula and the undead. His mother came from here up the road, and she told the stories of during the famine in Sligo, where people would be be piled up to be buried, and they would jump up and say, "I'm not dead," this kind of thing. And or to be walking the countryside at night, this kind of thing, or people even getting out of their graves. And this is where the Dracula thing came from. Now, regarding Frankenstein, there was an actual Frankenstein's castle. I've been in it. It was in a place called the Odenwald in the Hesse in Germany. And it was famous for a guy called Dippel. And it's quite possible that Mary Shelley knew about heard the story. Dippel was a kind of a mad scientist / herbalist who, in the tower of the castle which I was in, created this thing called Dippel's oil, which was supposed to be an elixir of life. Now, I don't know if it was successful or not, but he was accused of doing diabolical things in this castle, which was like, ironically, kind of like, Gothic architecture. So it's interesting how it all, we can draw a direct line between, say, Gothic music, like Sister Mercy and Susie the Banshees and Bauhaus, all the way back to that Year Without a Summer, and all the horror movies and everything, because horror was not a thing. It wasn't horror was not a genre really in those days, and they kind of invented this whole shadow world that is with us to the present, which is kind of very psycho, analytical and so on.
Yeah, and I think with the Gothic movement at that time in the early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, they were, one of the main fears was actually being buried alive, which makes sense with what you said about the what was the illness again you said?
Cholera.
That, yeah, right. I didn't know about the cholera, but I knew that the people of that time were frightened to death of being buried alive, and I thought it was just superstition, maybe, irrational fear. But that does make sense, and I think the stories, that would inspire stories to try and frighten each other, so you don't go wandering around late at night. And
it was made into a book by Edgar Allan Poe. And it was made into a movie by a fantastic film from the 50s with Ray Milland called Premature Burial. And they even used to do things like install devices where there's a string on a bell. So if you came to life while you're in the coffin, you could ring the bell and people would dig you up and get you out.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And this is what Ray Milland's character does in the Edgar Allan Poe movie version of the book. He goes to elaborate lengths to, if anything happens to him, because when they open up his father's grave, it was a terrifying scene. The inside of the coffin lid has all scratches. The man was trying to dig himself out because he was buried alive, and Ray Milland had this phobia that would happen to him. But they also, another thing from that time, the grave robbers, you'll often see graves with cages on top of them, and these cages were to stop the grave robbers from actually getting down there. They were actually dug into the ground and usually sunk into concrete or connected to huge stones, so the graves could not be stolen. So it was all these factors came together in 1816, the Year Without a Summer, to create the Gothic movement we have today. And I think it just goes to show you, Sarah, that we tend to see, when things happen in the world, we see the catastrophic aspects of it. But we never really pay much attention to the cultural aspects of it. And I find that's an extremely Fortean thing, especially when it changes the nature of people to actually look at the world in a different way. In this case, going into the shadow. So it was almost like the shadow that wasn't cast by the sun over the earth became the shadow inside artists and writers and poets to actually bring it out.
That's right. And the shadow that's been cast over the earth again, albeit it's not, the sun's not been blocked out, but metaphorically speaking, is a big dark shadow over the earth at the moment. And there's lots of creativity and things coming out of that, and things that haven't been born yet that will come out of it further along down the line as well. So maybe there'll be another renaissance at the end of this.
We don't know. We still haven't been told what came out of lockdowns yet. They'll probably, some artists or poets or writers or filmmakers could have been locked up during the lockdowns and created incredible stuff that we've yet to see. So, the human capacity and the human spirit to use art in these situations is amazing, really, when you think about it.
It is. In the face of adversity like that, like with the lockdowns, you can either sit down and be miserable and wonder when it's going to end, or you can do something with your time and do something productive, something creative, so something to take you out of this world and put you into your own and create something. Exactly. Write something, anything.
Yeah, so that's 1816, and I guess if anyone's seen the film Gothic with Gabriel Byrne, I couldn't find it anywhere, and I hadn't got time to buy it. If you've seen the film, leave some comments down below. if you thought it was good, it was interesting, or it was rubbish or worth. Because I do like Ken Russell's films, and I was quite disappointed that I wasn't able to get to watch a copy before we did this broadcast. But I'd like to hear what people have to say about that.
Yeah, and also it'd be interesting to hear in the comments if anybody's created anything during the lockdown of any, I would like to know what people were doing during the lockdown. It'd be interesting if they were inspired to pick up a pen or a musical instrument or a paintbrush or a movie camera.
The postmodern Prometheus.
Okay, so it's time now to go over to our weather reporter, Thomas Sheridan, and ask him whether we need our Enfield raincoats again this week for the week in psychic weather. Thomas?
Well, this week's psychic weather, we won't need our Renfield raincoats. There hasn't been any real Renfielding that I've seen of. But there seems to be a strange, interesting development in the global scheme of things, but also in the local scheme of things. I've no doubt that the matrix, or whatever you want to call it, is falling apart. That wave function connected to the thing that we've been connected to since 2020 is definitely collapsing. And we've seen some high profile resignations on the world stage. And we've seen some of the cockiness of cocky individuals and power crazed psychopaths of the last several years are suddenly lost their vigor, suddenly lost their ability to control. And I've known a few people that had car accidents this week. And it wasn't only the days we had ice, and I'm hearing about things are not working at the moment. So the psychic weather seems to be, I don't know if we're still in Mercury retrograde. I don't know a lot about astrology, but it seems to be that the old reality is collapsing in all kinds of ways, and that's including machines failing, people having accidents, and greater changes at the macro level. So the week in psychic weather, definitely this week, is no Renfielding. You don't have to worry about it, but be careful, because there seems to be a systemic failure in all things that were previously reliable, including bad things. Remember that. That's why we don't have doom music for the week in psychic weather, because it could be good psychic weather or bad psychic weather. So that's the week in psychic weather with me, Thomas Sheridan.
So do you think this falling away of the current psychopaths in power is something to do with this waveform, this tyrannical waveform falling down, like you was talking about in one of your videos on the quantum field?
Absolutely. And it's not necessarily the waveform connected directly to them. It's the entire Maya, the whole thing. Something's happening to reality right now, and it's falling down. It's collapsing. And it's a good thing, because it's almost like a refreshing thing. If you were to tell me that where we are right now with the things that have happened in recent days, back in 2021, I would not have believed you. Yet here we are. There's tremendous acceleration going on towards this as the wave function is collapsing. That's connected to this woke globalist world. And it's truly remarkable the way the language there people are talking in. I saw an interview with Dr. Naomi Wolf there, and she was like talking about like mass arrests and all this kind of thing. And she's a measured woman. She's not like a hysterical, arm waving type. So things are happening. A lot of people are developing bravado, but there's also, with this collapse, the house is falling down. Of reality is kind of falling down. Just be careful to step out of the way so a brick doesn't land on you. That's the way I
good advice.
Yeah. This is a time for silence. This is a time for quietness. Don't get caught up in things. Don't what's the word? Don't fight other people's battles. Just look after your own house, and you'll be fine.
Self-preservation and
Yeah,
keep your head down. Yeah.
yeah, because if you get quantum coupled with a collapsing waveform, it'll collapse you as well. So be careful. Choose your battles wisely. And the only battle you should really concerned about is your own survival right now.
Okay, so we're going to move straight along now, and we're going to discuss a haunted house, which was known as the most haunted building in Britain, and that was Borley Rectory. And I have a brief history here of the rectory. It was built in 1862 to house the rector of Borley, and it was situated in the village of Borley in Essex. And the rectory replaced an earlier hall that was destroyed by fire in 1841. Now, the rectory was said to have been haunted since it was built, which to me suggests that there was something about the ground it was built on. Now, on those grounds, the Benedictine monastery was supposedly built there around 1362, which gave rise to the legend of the Benedictines monastery, where a monk had an affair with a nun from the local convent. And when that affair was discovered, it's said that he was executed and she was bricked up alive in the convent walls. There's nothing... there's no history there to prove it happened or it didn't happen. It's a local legend. But in July 1900, the 4 daughters of the then current rector, Henry Bull, did claim to have seen the ghost of a nun. And the new rector, Guy Smith, and his wife, in 1927, 7 years later, when they moved in, the wife was cleaning out a cupboard and she saw a brown paper bag containing the young woman's skull. And other events experienced by the family included hearing the disconnected servant's bell ringing, lights appearing in the window, and footsteps in the house. And the wife said she also saw the ghost of a horse-drawn carriage. And after that, the family contacted the Daily Mirror, asking to be put in touch with the Society for Psychical Research, and the newspaper sent a reporter who went on to write a series of articles about the mysteries of Borley Rectory. Now, Harry Price was the paranormal researcher who turned up, and when he arrived, stones and objects started to be thrown around, and the Smiths actually thought that Harry Price was a conjurer who was falsifying the phenomena at the time. Anyway, the Smiths left in 1929, and the Reverend Foyster moved in with his wife and his daughter Adelaide. And they also reported incidents of bell ringing and windows shattering, stones being thrown and writing appearing on the wall. And the daughter was locked in a bedroom and there was no key. They reported a lot of poltergeist activity, including Mrs. Foyster being thrown out of bed. They tried 2 exorcisms, which didn't work. And during one of them, the rector was struck by a stone to his shoulder. The Foysters then left in 1937 and the rectory remained empty, and Harry Price, the psychic investigator, and 48 of his students from the Psychical Society spent periods of time at the rectory recording the phenomena, and they conducted a séance, and 2 spirits were said to be contacted by using a talking board. The first was of a young nun called Marie Lair, and she said she'd been murdered in a previous building at the site, and her body was either buried in the cellar walls or thrown into a disused well. And then a second spirit turned up at the séance and called himself Sume Amores, and claimed that he would set fire to the rectory at 9 p.m. on the 27th of March 1938, and that when he did, the bones of a murdered person would be revealed. So on the 27th of February 1939, the new owner of the rectory, Captain W.H. Gregson, was unpacking the boxes and cases and he knocked over an oil lamp, and the fire caught and spread out throughout the house, and it severely damaged the house, and that it was unlivable. And in 1943, Harry Price conducted a dig in the cellar and did discover 2 bones thought to be belonging to a young woman. And after that, the house was demolished in 1944. So it's got quite a grisly and macabre history.
Yes, Sarah, Borley Rectory. This story has come full circle for me in my life, funny enough. When I was about 11, 12, 13, there was a show on the BBC called The Ghost Hunters. And it was on at like about 10 o'clock in the evening. And my parents were out somewhere. And I was watching it at home, by myself. And it had a series of things about ghosts, paranormal spiritualists in England, very well made. And the last story was about Borley Rectory and the hauntings there. And I can honestly say it terrorized me for the next few years. It was so unbelievably frightening. In fact, the clip will play after Hocus Focus on Beyond Room 313, so you can watch it after you watch this show and see for yourself. And imagine being a 12-year-old boy watching this at night at home and being terrified by what happened, old-fashioned ghost hunting. And these guys had balls of steel. They didn't run away when they heard something, or there was none of the hysteria and nonsense you get in ghost hunting TV shows today. But those things that always stuck out to me, he talked about the history of the house. He said, absolutely, it was the most haunted house in England. There's no doubt about that. And he spoke about the 4 different rectors who lived there, all said they had seen specters, ghosts, and everything. But then he went on to make a very interesting point. He said after the house was demolished in 1944 or 43, the paranormal activity did not stop. It transferred itself over to the nearby church. And the church is like an 11th century Norman type church, and classic English country church. And he spoke about one of the rectors having to brick up the window and once in the kitchen because the nun used to look at him having his breakfast. Another one spoke about they had quite casually they had seen it. Oh yeah, we've seen her. And this man was saying they'd seen the nun walking a foot above the ground, up and back and forth, because the ground level had sunk since the time she was around. They talk about the 2 skulls were found, one in the house and one in the churchyard. And then they went into, you'll see the film yourself, and they got these recording with the cameras and audio, and it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. Now, at the end of it, it was not like a TV show today. The BBC reporter was not making fun of these guys. He was very respectful. He's believing them, actually, that they were sincere in their work. And he says, what do you think it is? And the ghost hunter said, I don't believe it's the dead walking the earth or anything like that. He says, I believe we're seeing like a tape recording, a playback of a time loop. Now, this is quite advanced for 1975 when this was broadcast. And it was a very important Fortean moment for me. Not only did it terrify the life out of me, it was the first time I ever thought the idea of ghosts as not being spooks from the dead, but actually being a kind of a tape recording or a time loop something. Now, Borley Rectory is just an astounding story. I mean, it'd be one thing if it was just one rector had this, but it was 4 of them. All 4 rectors, since the house was rebuilt in the 1800s, had all reported seeing this nun. And the fact that it transferred to the church shows it's connected to the land there. So it's definitely being brought about by something that was earlier on the site, before the rector's house. The rector's house just became an amplifier for it, and now it's moved to the church. I wonder if the church was destroyed, would it move to another building nearby? So I'm torn between the tape loop playing back, and I'm also torn with the idea of these being entities, more akin to like some kind of nature spirits or fairies or demons or something, maybe even jinn, and that emanated originally within the Benedictine Abbey, which, funny enough, was built around the time of the Crusades as well. So, I mean, it's in Essex, I believe, isn't it? It's not that it's
Essex. It's in the village of Borley in Essex. Yeah.
Have you been there yourself?
No, I've never been. No, and I do believe the house is genuinely haunted. And it's just like you say, many hauntings, ghosts or whatever they are, they don't perform on command, and the phenomena can be very subtle. But I've grown up in a haunted house, and I've seen enough phenomena for myself to know that these types of things, they do exist. They are real. and it can be quite traumatizing.
The bunkers have always hung their kind of evidence on the fact that Harry Price was a bit of a showman. He was probably more of an entertainer than he was an actual genuine parapsychical researcher or whatever, investigator. But I mean, I don't know how they continue to say that when 4 rectors who knew nothing, who were not connected to him, said they saw these things independently of one of another. They wouldn't lie. Why would they lie? They moved away because of it. Said that they were not frightened by the experience. They did not, especially one time when the lights and the nun would start walking, the lights and the nuns started walking towards them. They weren't frightened by it. But they also said that she was holding her jaw like she was in tremendous pain and sadness. And some of the sounds they recorded are of human size on the electronic voice phenomenon tape recordings. And they did find a skull in the house that did have evidence of a massive abscess in the lower jaw. So it may have well been her skull. So maybe her pain and suffering created a psychic imprint or something like that.
Maybe, or maybe it's over the years. Well, like the rectory, the Benedictine monastery was built in 1362, so that's a long time, and I'm sure there's been lots of tragedies and things going on since then. So it could be a build-up of layer upon layer upon layer, and it just gets thicker and thicker until it manifests something in the physical, like a haunting.
Yeah, and don't discount the fact that perhaps prior to even the Benedictine Abbey, there may have been megaliths there, or even the church was built on a site that was venerated by pagans for Celtic people for having certain energies and things like that. And it does have I mean, I've never been there, but it does have this, we've seen on the TV videos, there's something very mystical about the place. It looks like it's full of kind of energies of some kind. There's something about it. And I don't know, I haven't looked too much into recent stuff about Borley. But are you aware of anything like that in recent times?
I know that the people that live there now are they don't really want people going around looking at the house, and they don't want to talk about it for some reason. But I don't think that's because I don't know, because it would bring tourism into the village. It would bring some money into the village and jobs and things like that. I think there's a darker reason they don't want to talk about it. I think the residents and the people that live there may know something that went on up there, or some legend or some truth, and that's why. Who knows what goes on in these back?
Could be their ancestors even.
Yes.
Like the way in Salem and Massachusetts for years they fought against any tourism because the people who ran that city, it was their ancestors that killed the witches, and they didn't want to deal with that. Yeah, that's interesting. Another thing that I found interesting in the clip, which people who watch after Hocus Focus on Beyond Room 313, is that they hear sounds recorded on the tape recorder, EVPs, that are not of anything in the church in the present day, as if we're hearing sounds from locks that are no longer there and doors that are no longer there and things that are no longer in the church. But we're hearing the psychic imprint, the sonic imprint of them coming through the stone tape, or if you want to call it. But I know there's been a film made about it, which is people have told me is kind of silly in recent years. But there's definitely has to be something to a place that creates this powerful ghost energy, or this powerful, haunted, to use the word haunted in the broadest sense area. That has to be, whether it's on ley lines, whether there's something like we spoke about Liverpool last week, and a giant quartz crystal under the ground, something like that. Tell us about your own experience growing up in a haunted house. I'd like to hear about that for reference.
Yeah. No, not at all. No, actually grown up in 2. When I was very young, from about 4 to 9 years old, we lived in a flat, and that had a poltergeist in it, which was pretty active for all the time that we were there. During the time of me being there, my parents would explain it away as being something not to be afraid of. It's just one of those things, and I would just accept that. But pictures did fly off the wall and ornaments flew off the side. I remember my dad talking to my granddad and saying, "Don't know what we're going to do about this. It's what we're going to do about it. It won't stop." And I remember my granddad gave my dad a brass crucifix, and I must have been about 5 years old, and I can remember my granddad saying to my dad, "Put that over the bed. That'll stop the bastard." That's what he said. And they put this over my bed. We weren't religious, nothing like that. It didn't stop. I think it might have fell off a few times. And it was, to me, it was just explained as one of those things. It would wake me up in the night rustling sweet papers and crisp packets. Because you know what, kids hear a paper rustling, they think you've got sweets in your pocket, don't they? So it would mimic sweet wrappers being rustled, and there would be dark shadows walking by, and we were on the top floor. So so we had that. And then my parents' house, when I got older, that was very haunted, and I would see lots of things in there. I'd wake up and see people, things standing over my bed watching me. I've had my hair stroked by an old lady. I've had my covers pulled off the bed. And I was living at home. I was in my 20s, and I remember waking up, and I saw the cover of the duvet, the corner of the duvet just lifted in slow motion like that, came off me. And I'm watching it thinking, am I dreaming? No, I'm not dreaming. So I pulled it back, tried to go back to sleep, and the bugger did it again. It pulled it right off like that. So I was shot out of bed. I mean, I must have been 20, 25 maybe, running to my mum and dad, help, no, help. And so lots of things like that. But I've gotten used to it now.
Yeah,
I'm used to it.
I was going to ask you if your parents ever called a priest to, but like when you see that there was 4 rectors at Borley and not one of them was able to deal with the ghost, kind of shows you that they're not as hot shit in that department as they think they are. That ghost had outlived 4 different rectors. There's also a famous photograph of Borley that there was, after it burned down, I think it was like insurance pictures were taken, and you can see a brick hovering in midair by itself. And the person who took the brick said the brick was hovering by itself in midair.
Right.
Yeah, so
Wow.
even when the house was destroyed, things happened in the house. But maybe we should do one day, go down to Borley and do a BR 313 location report, a Hocus Focus location report. That'd be interesting. But
Would be.
so if you have any theories about the Borley haunting, and I know it's like a classic paranormal story, and everyone's heard of it probably. But if you've seen that TV show that I saw as a kid, and it terrified you too, let us know in the comments. Because or if you've been, better still, if you've been to the Borley site, that's even better. But if you know any about other similar stories around the world that we might be interested in, let us know. Because I think, Sarah, you'll agree, there's much more to the ghost story than the stereotypes surrounding it, of it just being about, the restless spirits of the dead.
Yeah. There's a reason that those villagers don't want outsiders going in to have a look. I mean, they don't stop you going in, but they don't like it. They're not very welcoming. They don't want you there really, and they'd rather tell you that it was all faked and falsified and not really true. But I don't believe that. I think there's a secret there to be hidden, and that just brings me on to another aspect of this that I wanted to discuss with you, Thomas, and that is, what are ghosts? I've got my own thoughts and feelings on that, and I know you have, and I just wanted to compare what your feelings on the matter is, and I'll give you mine.
I don't believe that the spirits of dead people. I go back and forth between that there's some kind of demonic entity or entity that appears in a certain form, or they're tape recorders playing back ancient times at certain conditions. I write the tape recorder plays, the whole stone tape idea. I think it's probably both. I think both things happen. And that would be my thing. But I absolutely don't believe under any circumstances that they're the dead being stuck on this earthly plane. Okay, what's your theories about it?
Well, I think there's three that I want to just bring to light now. Three different types of ghostly visitor, if you like. And I think we've got the recordings that are stuck in the imprint of the fabric of reality that just replay themselves over and over, like the classic white lady or the headless horseman that goes down the road at 9 p.m. every night. I do think that's a recording. And then I think you've got your earthbound ghosts, which I believe are people that have passed that might be feared to cross over properly due to unfinished business here, or they refuse to acknowledge that they're dead, or they're afraid to go over because they think they won't exist anymore, you know, depending on what they've believed in life. Or there might be a family member here that's so distraught with the death that they can't bear to leave their side at the moment, and they feel like they're helping by being around. But then I also think that ghost and spirit are different. I think spirit, and I believe that spirits are people that have passed over properly, and they can come back between the veils, but ultimately they're not trapped here, and they don't go around haunting houses and hanging around the living. They may just pass in and out, but they do go back. And I think that they live on the spirit realms until such time that they choose to reincarnate and come back again. What goes on the spirit realms with regards to reincarnation and what the procedure is there, I don't know. But yeah, I do believe that spirit and ghosts are two different things. And the reason I believe that, Thomas, is I've had a lot of information from spirit in regards to my own life and close friends and family. And they help me to tell a lot about a person, such as what their intentions are, whether their intentions are good or bad. And my whole life's been based on working with spirit and connecting with the spiritual realms. And in my own experience, it's all done through meditation and expanding consciousness. I don't know how it's done or why it's done. It's just something that comes natural to me. But I do believe that side of it is very different to going ghost hunting in a physical building and having recordings and earthbound spirits that might be trapped there. That's another kettle of fish altogether.
Well, that's really interesting. I look forward to hearing more of your stories of this stuff, and particularly your insights in how you got them through the meditation in the episodes of Hocus Focus to come. I didn't notice about you. That's really, have you ever done things like past life regression or anything like that?
No, I would love to do. That's something I would really, really like to do. But the past, what's been going on in the past 3 years, I kind of put the kibosh on that for the moment, and the cost of it as well. It's not a cheap thing to do, and you've got to find somebody that is reliable and trustworthy, and not a kook. It's not something you could just pick somebody and go. You've got to do your research and make sure it's somebody with good intentions who knows what they're doing. Yeah.
I've never. I saw a spectral head, floating head once, but I've never had that full ghostly experience. It hasn't happened to me yet. Yet he says, I'm open. I want it to happen. I'd like to have a decent ghostly kind of encounter at some point.
I did have an experience a few months ago, and I woke up at night and there was a brilliant. It was a woman, and she was lit up brilliantly, and all around her she was neon orange on the outside. And I looked at it and I saw it, and it was actually my friend's mum. It was my friend's mother.
And she's dead?
No, she wasn't. And she, when you get a balloon and you rub your hair on the balloon,
static,
and your hair goes like that. Yeah, she was like that, but it was all her hair. Her hair was up and her clothes were floating, and it was all in slow motion. And it did frighten me because she was neon in a very dark bedroom. And I did scream. I was quite hysterical because it was frightening me. It was my friend's mum. What's this? And I got the feeling I should contact my friend. And I hadn't spoken to my friend for many, many years. And it didn't feel, how do you ring somebody up and say, I've just seen the ghost of your living mother in my bedroom? You can't do it.
Yeah, you can't, it probably wouldn't be appropriate.
No, but a few weeks later, I got the news that her mother had passed away.
At the same time, you had this
around that time, yeah.
Well, that's something else.
So I don't know. She seemed to think it was okay to come in my bedroom and stand over the bed. I don't know, but maybe she was just having a float around.
In Bardo, I think they call that when before they've moved on, they float around as a kind of
but she was brilliantly lit. She was white in the middle, brilliant white light with a neon orange border around her, almost ginger it was, but neon. And she was huge, and she was like static electricity coming off, like when you put your hand on one of those balls.
That's fantastic.
It was the strangest thing. Frightened me.
Yeah, but it's some story. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from Borley Rectory to that, it really is a subject that's really open to so many interpretations. Maybe it's so strange it's beyond what we can even think. But that's amazing. That is amazing. And she was floating, you said.
She was about if you've got ground level, she would have been about that far off the ground. She wasn't on the ground. She was just maybe kind of halfway between the floor and the mattress where I was. She was hovering. That
reminds you what the guy said about the nun at Borley, that she wasn't on ground level. She was higher. Well, his theory was that the all ground level was lower, but maybe now it was something like what you experienced, a kind of a floating kind of thing.
Yeah, or maybe the spirit realms, maybe they're in the same place, but they're a little bit higher up than where we are. Maybe they're more here in our space, but we don't see them. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the floating realms is even mentioned in like a lot of spiritual texts.
Right.
That's where these things are. Yeah. And you think about it, like UFOs and stuff, where are they are in the floating realm, interesting. So that was the main topic this week, Borley Rectory. And now we're going to the location report. The city is monstrous and misshapen. Its mystery is not brooding, but a conspiracy. And these truths are evident above all to one who recognises that London's heart is Charing Cross. For the old cross, which is, even technically, the centre of the city, is so in sober moral geography. For here is the true life of the city, the aorta of the great heart of which London and Westminster are the ventricles. Charing Cross Station, moreover, is the only true metropolitan terminus. If there are any other terminals in London, I forget them, clear proof of their insignificance. But Charing Cross dates from before the Norman conquest. Here Caesar scorned the advances of Boudica, who had come to the station to meet him, and here St. Augustine uttered his famous mot non Angli sed Angliae. Charing Cross is the true link with Europe and therefore with history. It understands its dignity and its destiny. The station officials never forget the story of King Alfred and his cakes, and they are too wrapped up in the cares of who knows what to pay attention to the necessities of the would-be traveller. The speed of the trains is adjusted to that of the Roman legions, 3 miles an hour, and they are always late. So wrote the legendary British occultist Aleister Crowley in his fictional novel Moonchild. Aleister Crowley had no doubt that Charing Cross Station was and is the magical gateway into the city of London itself. As for myself, being well acquainted with the city of London, I always felt a notable shift in energy whenever I would walk in the evening from the Temple and down the Strand to Charing Cross Station itself. There is a distinct energetic footprint in this part of the vast metropolis that is very unique. I once spoke to a London detective who had worked in the area back in the 1980s and told me at times the street between the station itself and the river felt evil and ghostly, and he never liked working in the offices late at night. Charing Cross Station itself, as a railway terminus, first opened in 1864 after 4 years of construction, and right from the get-go in its earliest years of the station, strange things happened. At one point an inconspicuous trunk was dropped off at the station's luggage office and was left unclaimed. When the staff later opened it, it contained 5 severed body parts. The culprit, the Charing Cross trunk murderer, was later apprehended and executed for his crimes. The antiquity of the location is brought into focus within the station's forecourt, where there's a replica of one of the medieval Eleanor crosses. This was one of 12 such crosses to be commissioned by King Charles I, erected to mark the places where his wife, Eleanor of Castile, had her funeral procession and where it had stopped overnight. The crosses running from Lincoln in the north of England down to the location of Charing Cross also lent its name to the locality, and especially Charing Cross Station. The current replica cross in the forecourt today is an elaborate stone monument that features many crosses itself, but is not cross-shaped. The station took on a more official sacrificial function when Charing Cross became the main departure point for soldiers leaving to fight on the Western Front in World War I. At one point during the war, 283 troop trains departed the station and many more arrived there, bringing home the injured. Charing Cross is the national centre of London and is now the point from which all distances from London are measured, so in many ways the station is also the centre of England and at one time the British Empire as a whole. Perhaps this accounts for the strange energy and effect on people the location has. That being that Charing Cross is more than just a railway station, but literally a portal to and from many worlds. If you ever find yourself walking down from the Temple and down the Strand towards Charing Cross, late in the evening, as the sun has just gone down, I can assure you, you will feel that strange energy yourself, if you're open to those kinds of energies, that is. This is Thomas Sheridan, reporting for Hocus Focus from Charing Cross in London.
So we're going to move on to our next topic now, which is all about the legend of the Kraken. Now, I seem to have been followed around by this Kraken the last few weeks. Everywhere I go, I'm either seeing images of it or references to it in the mainstream media. And I even went for a drink last week, and looking right at me across the bar was a bottle of Kraken black rum behind the bar. So, yeah, so I want to know why it's appearing everywhere and why we've called this new variant the Kraken. So there's a legend that the Kraken is something that's been around for the last 800 years.
Well, my first introduction to Kraken was when I was a kid watching that fantastic film, Clash of the Titans. And Peter Ustinov as Zeus, he releases the Kraken. And it comes out to fight, like the two titans fighting under the sea. Now, it turns out the Kraken isn't part of Greek mythology at all. I found that out later. It actually it's a story that comes from one of the old kingdoms of Norway about 1,000 or so years ago, 800 years ago, talking of a giant octopus squid type creature. Now, we do have a bit of synchronicity because the very first good quality picture of a giant squid was recently taken only the other day off the coast of Japan by 2 divers. I'll show that on the screen now. So we do have a bit of synchronicity because we didn't know that before we did this show. But it was a giant squid or octopus type creature that lived in the North Atlantic between Norway, Iceland, Scotland, Ireland, Greenland, in that sort of northern area. Now, during World War II, there was a famous story of a German U-boat that was following an undersea channel that flows between Scotland and Ireland. And it was attacked by this object, this creature. And it was actually reported in the U-boat's logbook that this giant monster attacked them. and it was also been seen attacking another ship and destroying it. So the Kraken would appear to be a kind of a giant undersea monster. But now you're talking about why now? Okay, why now? Well, any good Lovecraftian tells you that, like Cthulhu and these deep ones, it is on a subconscious level about, when I talk about in my book Sorcery, I talk about we kind of are living in the age where Cthulhu is coming to the surface, and it's been manifested in the behaviors that the current matrix is giving us, the strange, woke, crazy, upside down, inverse reality. And it's almost like this is a symbol of all that coming to the surface to be revealed in order for us to actually know what we're dealing with. And I think that the reason why, and the Kraken appears in so many movies, like Pirates of the Caribbean and loads of things it appears in, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And this is the eternal sea monster. So we're kind of talking about this on two levels. One, what does it represent in a psychological or psychic level? This manifestation in the zeitgeist of a deep sea monster from under the ocean at this point in time. And two, the oceans being so vast and so huge that it's totally plausible that some colossal squid or octopus type creature lives at the bottom of the ocean. That's even bigger than the famous giant squid. There's something else again. This thing could take down a ship or whatever. A leviathan, as it's mentioned in the Bible, that kind of Cthulhu type colossus, and it could exist down there. It could be down there. And in fact, in the South Seas, in the southern pole of inaccessibility, the most remote place on Earth, the U.S. Navy detected a thing that was called the bloop, which sounded like a gigantic animal making a noise under the South Pacific, exactly where, in the location where Lovecraft said Cthulhu is sleeping in Rael, which was creepy in itself of all the places it appeared. But that was the U.S. Navy. They said a gigantic submarine animal made this sound, a colossal submarine animal. The seas are so mysterious to us. We know more about space than what's down there. So that's alone. On the cryptozoology thing, it's a phenomenal topic. Fantastic. In the mythology thing, it's a phenomenal topic. The sea monsters in so many cultures. In fact, it's talking this cryptozoology, I have a set of all encyclopedias from 1890, and it lists this giant sea serpent as an actual creature. It doesn't call it a myth or a kind of a belief. It actually lists it as an actual creature that exists. And so between that, the psychic thing, the mythological thing, and the cryptozoology thing, the Kraken subject is just fantastic. The fodder it provides for a show like this.
Okay, so I've got a few musings and ideas that have come to me with regards to the Kraken from a psychic level, coming at it from a 2023 level. And I've been thinking, are we being psychically made aware of an alien consciousness that's behind the last 3 years and feeding off our souls if we submit to the science and keep repeatedly injecting the venom or the octopus ink into our veins? Or another thing I've been thinking about is I did a video about it, a quick video on my own channel. I didn't go into too much detail, but maybe a Kraken alien-like consciousness was floating around in deep space, and it heard the communication from the SETI telescope, and it's answered. Except it's not come here in a spaceship, which is what we would all expect. It could have come into human consciousness on a mass psychological level, and then it sat and patiently waited for us to create the vessel for it, and it finally arrives via the needlecraft, and it's then made physical. This is really out there, but it's then made physical in the arteries of the bodies that succumb to it in the form of Mother Hydra's babies. Maybe the way in is through the needlecraft and into the blood vessels.
Yeah, well, I'm down with all that because, I've been talking about that for a while. And the fact that they even used expression like calamari inside them, and it's
Yes.
a giant, and then this giant squid appears today, just as like things are really bad in regarding the issues that we're dealing with in the world regarding the needlecraft fallout and so on. And I often think that this collapse in the matrix is connected to that as well. This wave function collapse with the globalists, which they hung everything on that thing. And now it's almost like betraying them. And I've no doubt there's a non-human consciousness behind that whole thing. No doubt about it at all. And this, I mean, we are literally, from the beginning of the lockdown, I was constantly talking about like the only way I can make sense of the world right now is through the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. It's the only thing. We have become the protagonist as a species. We've all become the protagonist of those stories. We're those stories begin with someone killing themselves or going mad, and then recalling what had happened, like a prologue. And the only way I saw a way out of it was to constantly invoke mythology like the Middle Earth cycle and the Lord of the Rings. It was like, I don't think I would have like got through the last 2 years if I wasn't able to rationalize on those ways and then kind of find therapeutic elements to it. At the same time, too, I've been talking now for a good few years now about the concept of octopuses being from the planet, possibly from the moon Europa, orbiting, Jupiter. And how that ties in with Article C. Clarke's 2001. And then I did the VON special on the carpenters calling occupants from interplanetary craft. And so, did they heard her? Now they've heard us. And I do believe that if there was such thing as an invasion of the body snatchers or a planetary attempted takeover, wouldn't it be very crude to actually do it in terms of large numbers of spaceships landing? What better way to do it is to arrive as a kind of a medication?
Yeah, I agree. And it sounds crazy, but the embalmers and the funeral directors have said they're pulling out some kind of, what was it you referred to it as?
Calamari substructures.
Calamari, yeah. And I've seen those things on photographs and on video, and allegedly those things are still growing and moving when they've been pulled out. So where are they going? What are they doing with them? Where are they going? Where are they being stored? Are they being burnt? Are they being buried? Are they put in some kind of storage in jars, like some scene from the X-Files? What's happening to them when they're pulled out?
And the globalists seem possessed. I mean, I saw the guy from a famous pharmaceutical company that begins with the letter P at Davos, and he was just like, they were hassling about like, your product doesn't work. What about all the people who are like transubstantiated and all this stuff? And he was like, "Go away, you maggot! Go away, you!" Like he was talking to a lower species. This is like what it feels like the one who said at the EU, we worked at the speed of science. But what science? Alien science? Spaceship science? Invasion science? What science? It certainly wasn't healthcare science. And then all the things like that went on, the abominations of the dancing nurses. And I mean, you said your theory is out there, but it's not as out there as what we've experienced in real life since 2020. That's been bloody out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all the coppers and the police all dancing to Jerusalem. And now they've uncovered a new temple at the bottom of the Temple Mount, an ancient structure underneath where the Wailing Wall is, and they're currently excavating it. And it's all that to me is a kind of an augury as well, on that level. I do believe, I have no problem at all. I don't find what you're saying out there at all. It's a rationalization, of course, but that's what the purpose of the show is, that we speculate these things. But honest to God, I can't say that's not true, because it seems so true.
Another thought, maybe on the other side of the coin, would be that the Kraken is some kind of allegory for whatever it is that's infiltrated us is now turning on the tyrants, maybe, and is going to create a whirlpool and pull them down under and take them instead.
Absolutely. Like,
that would be nice.
The farmer uses a sheepdog, but the sheepdog is still subservient to him. And this alien, if it was an alien consciousness using them, it wouldn't care for them any more than it does for us. That it'd be only their own delusions to make them believe. There's a film called Dracula, Christopher Lee, and I encourage people to go watch it. And what the plot of the story is, these millionaires get together, these kind of like Davos type WF millionaires. This is 1972 now, this film. And 72, the Satanic Rites of Dracula. But what happens is that Dracula is approached by these industrialists who have a powerful disease, and they're going to use it to hold countries hostage and take money off them, like criminal operation. And what Dracula does, he takes the thing and kills them. And they were like, "But you said you're with us." And he goes, "Yeah." They thought they were going to be ruling the world with the kind of Prince of Darkness, Dracula. But he says, "What?" And he laughs at them and gasses them, or kills them with the virus as well. And that's what it would be like. That's what it would be like. This thing would have what? We don't have a deal. I'll make a deal with you scummy humans. This kind of thing. And and they do seem to be like that at the moment. Like, why, that strange, the equine individual down in New Zealand has suddenly galloped off out of the stable. Like, what's that all about? What's that all about? I mean, it almost seems like she was frightened when she was giving that speech, as if she had been made privy to something that she previously didn't know about or something.
Yeah. Could it be that this thing has passed through, fed off us, got its fill, it's got a full belly now, and it thinks, well, I'm just going to take down the instigators of this, and I'll be on my way and leave the rest that are still standing alone, leave the planet alone?
Well, my theory is it's already gone. It went last year. It went around November last year, but the residual after effects are still here. And this is probably why their bravado is present, and they're failing. Like at their big gangster get together in Davos, so few of them were there. You do wonder if they are now, they're like hoes without a pimp. The pimp is gone, and that's what they are like now. And they have no guidance. This thing has abandoned them, and they didn't expect that. It got its fill from this planet, this realm, and it moved on, and it's gone off somewhere else. That's what I believe. And rather than say it just has no use for them anymore, but they have to deal with the consequences of this horror that they unleashed upon humanity, and they know they're in deep shit because they can't hide what's happening. I don't think they expected the DNSs to happen in the numbers and the ferocity that they're happening now.
The lady, the horse lady leaving, and a lot of people have said, "Oh well, we're just going to be met with another tyrant. It'll be another leader who's just as bad or worse."
I don't feel that at all. I don't feel that at all. I feel that world is over. I think that they're just dissolving away into miasma, they're turning to steam. I don't think that at all.
Gas.
Yeah, I don't think that at all. I don't feel. There's no part of me feels like there's another set of them coming along. I just think the whole little plan has failed. They look like, if you the video, they looked like they were depressed at Davos, and lots of them didn't show up. Many of them that were the usual regular attendees never showed up. It just was very strange, that alone. The cockiness and arrogance and bravado was gone. It just wasn't there this year. And you had interesting. Did you see John Kerry's speech?
No.
He's Skull and Bones. He's from Yale with the Bushes. He ran for president against George Bush Jr. back in the day. He gave a speech about climate change, and he said, in terms of what we're doing here, you'd have to think in terms of extraterrestrial forces. or something like that. This is an extraterrestrial concept. And I was like, what? What? Where did that come from? So, and then he seemed hysterical. Al Gore seemed hysterical. They didn't have the same smugness and arrogance they normally have. So yeah, maybe it's something like that. She looked terrified when she was leaving. And then you see what's happening in China, where there's like millions dying because there's the zero policy there last year, where they locked people up, stopped people from developing their immune systems, and now they have no immune systems to fight the regular seasonal viruses. And they're like, China is ostensibly dying right now. That's why they're giving people free holidays to go overboard or abroad to strengthen their immune system. Their scam is up. It's failed completely, and that's because the energy, and I agree with you, that was guiding them, it's not guiding them. It's gone now, and now they're left to deal with the mess, and they don't know how to clean it up.
Yeah. It's important not to feel any empathy for these people,
or even people in your neighborhood who wouldn't let you into a place and were nastily because you weren't transubstantiated and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not having any forgiveness for lots of people. And I'm just talking.
No, me neither.
I mean, it was the greatest education ever. We saw people for what they truly are.
Yeah, and I think it made us all stronger as well.
Yep.
We don't care so much now what people think, because having gone through that, everything else just rolls off. So it was a blessing, really. That exactly. It was training. So yeah.
And that leads us beautifully to the psychic hygiene report with Sara.
So this week, I want to talk about earthing. If we're not earthed, then we're at the whim of every situation or task or person that comes into contact with us. And we can be easily manipulated, or we can feel insecure, afraid, or overwhelmed. And it's really important then to get a sense of the earth beneath us and to feel how she supports us. So earthing or grounding is to get a sense of your own body's energy connecting to the earth and anchoring you to it, so you don't physically float off all over the place. And it's especially important for people who are intuitive, who are sensitive, who spend a lot of time in their heads. They need to anchor their energy around the crown to deep down into the earth. And a good way to do that is to focus your mind on the ground beneath you, and then connect it in your mind and imagine that the energy connection is generating from the top of your head, and then push it down through the body and out of the soles of your feet and keep it going down into the ground. Now you can visualize this energy as being a flame or a bright light or any color of your own choosing. And if you're not great at visualizing, then get a sense of feeling it instead, whatever works best for you. You could even imagine that you're a tree and that your body is a trunk and you've got deep roots going down into the earth. Or maybe even go out and hug a tree and just feel how solid and strong trees are. Other things you can do is to go outside and touch the earth with your bare feet or your hands. We have shoes on most of the time, and this can block our energetic connection to the ground. Wear a necklace or an amulet made of hematite, and then focus on the crystal and just feel the tree roots coming out of your feet and into the earth. All the techniques like this, they're more effective the more that you do them. And when we practice psychic hygiene, don't expect bells and whistles, because all psychic work is very subtle and it needs a really calm and patient attitude. A lot can be done in the mind. So most of the suggestions that I'm giving you to do here, they're portable and they can be done at work, in a stressful situation, or at home, and no one will be aware of what you're doing, even if you decide to do one sat on the bus. I try to ground myself every day, and I'm as guilty as the next person for forgetting to do it. And when I do forget to do it, I'm all over the place. I'm flighty. I can't finish tasks. I can get pushed and pulled from one idea to the next. And I find myself saying yes when I mean to say no, and I just don't feel like I'm in control of my own day. So I ground myself by taking walks in the woods. And I went out for a walk yesterday, and when I got back home, I felt really good and my head was clear. I was productive and I got so much more work done instead of just sitting there thinking about it. So that's my psychic hygiene suggestion for this week. And feel free to let us know in the comments if you've got some of your own suggestions that you use for staying grounded, because I'd love to hear them.
That's really interesting, Sarah, and I'm down with all that stuff. What you were saying about doing it on the bus or train going to work, I have a lot of difficulty with people. Yeah, I can't think when people are, shouting and talking in the background. I'm very annoyed by that, or put off by that, or kids screaming. And I found a great help in that respect to calm myself when I'm on a long train or even plane trip was I got some noise cancellation headphones, and they go right over your ears and they cancel it. It's almost like a magical technology, but they cancel out most background noises. So you just have your own silence inside your head. And I thought, if you want, I would find now that I can have now meditative experiences on planes and trains and buses, which I didn't have before, because I'm no longer hearing, the idiots around me. And sometimes you can have chronzonic type effects where a chronzonic type person near you may be aware that you're trying to meditate and deliberately become obnoxious and annoying and banging things, tapping things, kicking things, whistling. And that's actually one of the things you can spot chronzonic infection in others, is when you're trying to meditate or something, or concentrate or read a book, and someone nearby you on a bus or train or a plane for no reason starts tapping, banging, whistling. And those noise cancellation headphones I found were a great aid in that. But yeah, everything else said, the bare feet on the ground, it's all true, and it is. That's why they call it grounding and earthing and electronics and electrical circuits. They literally feed the end of into the ground. And what the earthing does, or the shielding does, in a metal case around an electronic device, it keeps frequencies from coming in and getting into the circuit. So it's exactly the same thing. And that's because that metal case that surrounds the radio or amplifier is earthed into the ground, into the earth, literally through the mains electrical system, through the green wire. So, once again, we are electromagnetic beings, and you just basically show that with your psychic hygiene report. So thanks very much for that, Sarah.
Okay, is that part of the show where Thomas and I suggest a book that's had a big influence on us over the years? And this week I'm suggesting Journey of Souls by Michael Newton. So Michael Newton is a hypnotherapist and a counsellor, and he's a skeptic by nature. And he got into past life regression after a client had come to him to find the origin of a lifetime of chronic pain down his right side. And he uncovered a past life as a World War I soldier who was killed by a bayonet, and he was able to eliminate the pain once they'd found the cause. Now, this inspired Michael Newton to write this book. And the book is a journal about the spirit world with some amazing insights into what happens to us in our life between lives. And it records 29 clients who, under hypnosis, have recalled their experiences between their physical deaths and the life between each life. Now, included in the 29 clients in this book are men and women who were very religious. There were others who had no particular spiritual belief, and the majority of the subjects fell somewhere in between the two extremes, but they all had very different philosophies about life. Now, under hypnosis, they go into detail about things such as how it feels to die, what you see and feel right after death, what happens to disturbed souls, why you are assigned certain soul groups in the spirit world, and what you do when you're there, and how you choose another body to return to Earth, and the different levels of souls. and when and where you first learn to recognize soulmates on Earth. And it's written like a travel log of 29 people. And it isn't written in a fluffy way or anything like that. It's written from a serious and investigative point of view. And it contains all the transcripts of the hypnosis sessions and all the case studies of these 29 subjects throughout the book. So if you want a real in-depth look behind the veil of death and rebirth, then this is the book that I recommend. And it reinforced my own relationship with spirit and cemented my own belief into reincarnation, into a knowing. And if I can just tag on to the end, I just have a small reincarnation story regarding my niece. I was looking after my niece last week, and we were sat in the kitchen looking at a book about colourful creatures. And I turned the page to talk about a kingfisher. And I told her that I'd seen a kingfisher at the river at the back of the house. And then my niece is 4 years old, and she looked at me, and this very grown-up manner and attitude came over her, and she said, "When my dad was 4 and I was 25, I took him to the river to see a kingfisher." And I said, "Really? How does that work?" And she said, "Well, he was big, he was small, and I was big. I was 25 and he was 4, and it was so grown up. And then it just went. And then she was my 4-year-old niece again. And it was just surreal."
That's a wow moment.
Yeah.
My book this week is The Re-Enchanted Landscape by Rupert White. Earth Mysteries, Paganism and Art in Cornwall, 1950 to 2000. This book is wonderful. It's been a huge inspiration in me in the concept of re-enchanting all ancient and sacred landscapes. What the book is about, it talks about the hippies, the beatniks, the beat poets, artists that moved into Cornwall in that period and took Cornwall from being like just a rustic part of, well, it's not part of England, it's in its own country, but a rustic part of Britain, and basically enchanted it, brought back its ancient magic and mystery by just re-enchanting the landscape, by painting it, by writing poetry about it, by going to ancient sites and talking about them, stone circles, collecting folk magic. And it has dozens of photographs of what went on in Cornwall from the hippie years and how it basically created a kind of a culture that exists everywhere now. They kind of hauntologicalized by accident Cornwall. And even if you're not interested in Cornwall, this is a very inspiring book for the part of the world you live in, about how you could reincarnate the landscape through veneration, through art, a paganism, if you want to do that kind of thing. And it has interesting stuff on Colin Wilson and the Witchcraft Museum in Boscastle, which I've actually spoken at myself, and so on. So that's The Re-Enchanted Landscape by Rupert White. Hard book to get, unfortunately. They do show up on eBay now and again. If you can get your hands on it, get it, because it's an absolute treasure, a book I love. And that's my recommendation for the book this week. And on this week's Hocus Focus, we're introducing a new segment, and it's look at TV and videos and Fortean, hauntological, folk horror revival, and similar topics. This week, the first one we've chosen is the 1980 episode of the British version of Hammer House of Horror, and it's called Guardians of the Abyss, starring none other than the fantastic Paul Darrow, who you know as Avon from Blake 7, who puts in a tour de force performance, and the story revolves around a black magic group trying to get its hands on a scrying mirror that belonged to Dr. D, to John D. And Paul Darrow's involved in this. And they have a girl called Alison who is basically being groomed as the sacrifice for the group. And it's the most cliche-ridden thing you've seen. It's like the Wicker Man to the devil a daughter, and the devil rides out all into one TV show of 50 minutes. It's got every cliche in the book. Who cares? It is fantastic. And it's just wonderful. It's exactly what it says on the tin. It's if you love all those kinds of films, you're going to love the Guardians of the Abyss episode of the Hammer House of Horror. And it has a great twist in the tale in the end, which if you've seen The Wicker Man, you know where it's kind of going. But I'm not going to fully, it doesn't matter if it's all predictable and it's all straight up and it's all cliched. It's wonderful and you love it. And one thing I will say about this, the writer knew his stuff. And back in 1980, people were introduced to John Dee, Edward Kelly, the Tula Society, Enochian. This was all on a mainstream TV show. And most famous of all, Corazon, because it takes place around the group calling itself the Corazon Society. And I'll let you take it from there, Sarah.
Okay. Well, the film is typically Hammer. It's full of deep saturated colours with lots of reds and blacks throughout the film, and lots of satanic symbols are used and paraphernalia. It's very theatrical. And if you don't know anything about the subject of Corazon, then you could be forgiven for thinking it's just a very over-the-top piece of fiction. Go to bed feeling a bit uneasy and then get up in the morning and forget all about it. But when you do know the story of Corazon, then it makes you feel very uneasy, and you realise that putting the theatrics and the stereotypes aside, that story has a lot of basis in truth, and he may indeed be here and having a massive influence on humanity. And also with the Hammer series, I know that those involved and some of the big named actors such as Christopher Lee knew a lot about black magic, and they knew what they were doing where the occult's concerned. And I think it's one of the reasons why throughout the film they mispronounced the name of Corazon. I think they mispronounced it deliberately so they wouldn't risk bringing it in. And I say that because I recall watching an interview with Christopher Lee talking about black magic and acting out the rituals for Hammer. And he was asked if he regarded black magic as fictitious or is there some truth to it. And he looked quite taken aback and he said, some truth. It's 100% truth. There's nothing fictitious about black magic in any way, shape or form. It's a fact that has existed for several thousand years. And it's a really, really interesting interview. And I'm going to put the link to it. It's a black and white one. I'll put the link to it in the comments.
Yes, they deliberately pronounced it as Corazon in the kind of Macbeth, the Scottish play kind of way, which is very interesting. And I've seen another interview with Christopher Lee, a series of them that were filmed in University College Dublin when he was quite old. And he warned the students under no circumstances get involved in this occult stuff. He says you could end up losing your soul. And it's the Hammer House of Horror franchise. Now, this is the British version, not the American version of the TV show. And again, it looks beautiful. Like everything Hammer, it's a fantastic advertisement for British tourism because they always film in the most beautiful locations around England and stuff like that. English tourism in particular. But I thought that the girl was beautiful. She looked like Kate Bush. I thought the actor, I can't remember his name, he was the one who was in that movie Harry's Game. That was a big hit in the early 80s. And he was also Paul Darrow, and who, was just amazing. And that's the kind of like the occultist who wants that scrying mirror at any cost. And the way the other antiques appraiser, the hero of the story, uncovers these things, he talks about the Tula Society. He mentions Victor Newburgh and Crowley in the desert. And so you were actually watching an hour-long TV show in 1980 that was giving you an actual real occult education. How many TV shows are like that today? And people would have watched that. It was entertainment and a bit of fluff. But the writers of the TV shows back then actually went to the trouble of studying the subject, getting deep into it. And like Dennis Wheatley in his novels, put the real thing across in a fictional delivery. So I highly recommend it. Did you enjoy? I loved it because I've seen it a few times. But did you enjoy it, Sarah?
I did, yes, I did enjoy it. And there was an extra layer of anxiety to it because I know the story and I know that it was based on a lot of facts. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just some hammy we used to call it hammy house of horror when I was in our house, but it wasn't some hammy show. There was a lot of truth in that, so it was quite, quite real. And it's just the difference is he lived in the mirror. It was to do with the mirror in this episode, and he's gone from the mirror to the internet.
Yeah, the phone, the phone screen is just the scrying mirror of today, and what do we have in this day and age? We have babble, we have confusion, we have babblers in the abyss. The internet's full of them, all trying to put you. In fact, if there was ever a medium created for Choronzon, it was the internet. Now, I've spoken about it loads of times, but it's again, it was almost like prophesizing the future. And the classic thing also of the ritual taking place in a stately home, rich people, that Dennis Wheatley thing, to tell us that the aristocrats and the high polloi, they're into all this stuff. They're doing it. And it's just like I was talking today with Neil about the promo video for the conference coming up in St. Anne's, that the Pendle witches, the first witchcraft laws in England that had any real teeth to them, that had the death penalty, were passed by Queen Elizabeth. This is the woman who came to power by virtue of John Dee and Edward Kelly. They know the occult works and they keep it for themselves. And so people they were whistleblowing. I think there's a lot of whistleblowing in these kinds of things. And one, to be very careful of the occult, but also that guy in the big house on the hill, he's up to stuff that he's telling you is bad and not to do it. And you remember Christopher Lee, and I'm a big fan of Christopher Lee. He's a wonderful actor and, a tremendous life he had. But, he was of an Italian aristocratic family, so he knew more than he was letting on.
He did. And we've had our own gremlins in the machine while we've been filming this as well, haven't we?
Yeah, this is the first time we've done the show, and my machine the camera kept freezing constantly. And so we probably had some Choronzonic activity on here as well, or Konthic or whatever. But this is another thing. When you start talking about these things and highlighting them, they happen. You bring attention to them. They happen. It's almost like they notice you. And for years, I wouldn't say the name Choronzon, but now I think you can. It's so out there now. It doesn't really have that. It's not like a great secret anymore. So I don't mind saying the name now. But he is the Lord of Cancer. Okay, cholera, and we were just talking about that earlier on and chaos. So we had cholera and chaos in this thing, and then we had cancer by the needlecraft. So maybe Choronzon. I saw a very interesting art video today with Paul Joseph Watson interviewing a Orthodox priest called Father Bailey. I've actually bought on the UFO Deception. I've ordered his book, and we'll do a show on this in the future. And he talks about that these UFOs are a demonic force, and this is something that we want to really cover on Hocus Focus in future episodes. So I hope you like the new feature for the Haunted Cinema. And I had a great time tonight, except I've been a bit tired because I didn't get any sleep last night because of a crazy cat. But the Gremlins, we got through the show. Thanks very much again, Sarah. And the show will be on my channel on this Sunday coming up, which is 22nd, I think. And don't forget, I have that clip of the BBC, The Ghost Hunters, immediately playing after it on a different video. And then the next one, Hocus Pocus 4, will be on Sara Mondaini's channel, and you have to subscribe to that so you don't. And thanks for doing that, because you got some nice views there, didn't you?
I got some. Yes, I did. Yeah, and some and lots of subscribers. So that's brilliant. And thank you to everybody who subscribed and who's been watching. And if you've not subscribed to the BR313 channel, make sure you subscribe to that as well. Make sure you share these shows far and wide, because you are our only form of advertising, really. And the further you share us, and the more views we get, and the bigger the show can become.
And that's a wrap, and we'll see you next week on Hocus Focus.
Bye.